I never expected my life to implode through a text message. But there it was, lighting up my phone on an otherwise normal Tuesday morning. Hey, just wanted to let you know we're planning to move in next month. The previous owner said it would be vacant by then. My name is Quinn, and until that moment, I thought I was the previous owner they were talking about. Except I hadn't sold my house. At least, I hadn't agreed to sell anything. There must be some mistake, I typed back, my hands shaking. I own this house, and it's not for sale. The response came quickly, we bought it last week. The paperwork's all signed. Maybe check with your husband. My stomach dropped. Ryan had been acting strange lately, distant, taking calls in other rooms, disappearing for hours on business meetings. But selling our house? That was impossible. He couldn't do that without my signature. Could he? I called Ryan's office, but his assistant said he was in meetings all day. Of course he was. I drove home anyway, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a scam. Maybe someone was trying to pull something. Maybe. I pulled into our driveway, my driveway, and saw Ryan's car there. So much for those meetings. The front door was unlocked. Inside, I found him in his home office, surrounded by boxes and packing tape. He didn't even look surprised to see me. "You're home early," he said, like this was just another day. "Someone texted me about buying our house," I said, watching his face carefully. "Funny thing is, I don't remember putting it up for sale." He kept packing, not meeting my eyes. "I was going to tell you tonight." "Tell me what exactly?" "That I'm leaving." He finally looked up, and I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. "The house is sold. I've already moved most of my money to a new account. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce." The room started spinning. "How did you sell the house without my signature?" He smiled then, and it was cold. "Remember last month when you signed those insurance papers I gave you? You should really read things more carefully, Quinn." I felt sick. Those papers had been thick, and I'd trusted him. After 12 years of marriage, I'd trusted him completely. "Where am I supposed to go?" My voice sounded small, even to me. "That's not really my problem anymore." He sealed another box. "You have 30 days to vacate." I'd start packing if I were you. I wanted to scream. To throw things. To demand answers. Instead, I asked the one question burning in my throat, why? "Because I can," he said simply. "And because my mother was right, you've always held me back. This way, we both get what we want. I get my freedom, and you get a lesson in paying attention." His mother. Of course Carol was involved. She'd never thought I was good enough for her precious son. Now it all made sense, the whispered phone calls, the sudden visits, the way she'd been smirking at me during Sunday dinners. I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You know what's funny? I always defended you when people said you were just like your mother. Turns out they were right all along." His face darkened. "Get out." "Oh, I will," I said, finding strength in my anger. "But don't think this is over. You and Carol might think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." I walked out of that house with nothing but my purse and my dignity. But as I drove away, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about Ryan's father, Henry, still recovering from his stroke in that fancy care facility. The facility that Carol managed all the finances for. Something told me Henry might be very interested in hearing about his son's recent activities. And I had 30 days to make sure justice was served, not just for me, but for everyone they'd ever betrayed. The Sunset Valley Care Center always smelled like artificial lavender and broken promises. I hadn't planned on visiting Henry today, but after my world imploded, he was the only person I could think to turn to. Ironic, considering he could barely speak since his stroke 3 months ago. I found him in the garden, parked in his wheelchair near the koi pond. His right side was still partially paralyzed, but his mind was sharp as ever. I could tell by the way his good eye tracked me as I approached. "Hey, Henry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mind some company?" He gestured to the bench beside him with his working hand. As I sat down, I noticed his lunch tray was untouched. Carol was supposed to be handling his care, but the dried-out sandwich and cold soup told a different story. "They're not feeding you properly, are they?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Henry's face tightened, and he slowly shook his head. Then, with visible effort, he pointed to his jacket pocket. I reached in and found a crumpled piece of paper. As I unfolded it, my hand started trembling again. It was a bank statement. Henry's personal account had been nearly drained, with regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. The dates matched up perfectly with when Carol took over his finances after the stroke. "Did you know about this?" I asked. Henry's good hand clenched into a fist. He nodded, then made a writing motion. I pulled out my phone's notes app and held it where he could type with his working hand. It took him several minutes, but what he wrote made my blood run cold. "Ryan and Carol. Heard them planning. Selling house was just start. You heard them talking about selling my house?" Another nod. He typed again, "Week before stroke. Carol said needed money. Ryan agreed help." The pieces started falling into place. Carol had always lived beyond her means, and Ryan had been complaining about his business struggling. They weren't just betraying me, they were stealing from Henry while he lay helpless in a hospital bed. "Why didn't you tell someone?" I asked. His finger trembled as he typed, "Stroke next day. Carol took phone. Controls visitors." A nurse approached us, her face pinched with concern. "Mrs. Mitchell. I wasn't aware you were visiting today." Mrs. Carroll specifically requested to be notified of all visitors. "That's odd," I said, standing up. "Since I'm still legally Mrs. Mitchell for another 30 days, I have every right to visit my father-in-law." The nurse hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Of course, but nothing," I cut in. "In fact, I'd like to see Henry's care plan and visitor logs. Now." 20 minutes later, I was staring at documents that made my stomach turn. Carol had been systematically isolating Henry, restricting his visitors and even limiting his therapy sessions. The care plan she'd approved was bare minimum, despite Henry having excellent insurance coverage. I looked at Henry, seeing the fear and frustration in his good eye. "I'm not leaving you here like this," I said. "We're going to fix this." He typed slowly, "Careful. Carol dangerous when cornered." "I know," I said, remembering the cold calculation in Ryan's eyes earlier. "But so am I." As I was leaving, my phone buzzed. A text from Carol, "Heard you visited Henry. Stay away from my family." I smiled grimly and typed back, "Funny, I was just about to text you the same thing." Another buzz, "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually," I replied, "I think I'm finally starting to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. See you soon, Carol." I turned off my phone and headed to my car, my mind already forming a plan. They thought they could isolate Henry and steal everything from both of us. But they'd forgotten something important. Before I was a video editor, I'd studied accounting. And I knew exactly how to follow a paper trail. Carol was right about one thing, though. This was about family. Just not the way she thought. Henry needed protection, and I needed allies. It was time to show Ryan and Carol what happened when you underestimate the people you're trying to destroy. The storage unit smelled like dust and secrets. I'd followed Carol here after she left the care facility, watching her punch in the gate code from my parked car down the street. Now, at 3 a.m, I was picking through boxes of financial records she'd hidden away. My phone buzzed, a text from Mia, "You're insane. What if you get caught?" I ignored it, focusing on the documents in front of me. Carol had been busy. Investment accounts, property deeds, insurance policies, all in Henry's name, all being slowly drained or transferred. But something wasn't adding up. The amounts were too large for just Henry's assets. Then I found the letter. Ryan, I know you're having doubts. Carol's handwriting was shaky, unlike her usual precise script. But we've come too far to stop now. Quinn's house is just the beginning. Once we secure the rest of the properties from the trust, we'll have enough to. The letter trailed off there, but another document caught my eye. A trust agreement, dated 20 years ago. Henry's father had left properties to both Henry and Carol, but with conditions: they couldn't sell without mutual consent. Carol's signature was on recent transfer documents, but Henry's looked wrong. My hands shook as I took photos of everything. They hadn't just forged my signature on the house sale, they'd been forging Henry's signature on trust documents for months. A car door slammed outside. I froze, hearing footsteps approaching. There was nowhere to hide in the narrow unit. The footsteps stopped just outside. "I know you're in there, Quinn." Ryan's voice. Of course Carol had set up surveillance cameras. "You really should be more careful about following people," he continued. "Mom saw you tailing her earlier." I stayed silent, my mind racing. The unit had no back exit. "Come on out," he said, softer now. "We can talk about this like adults." Like adults? I found my voice. "Is that what you call forging signatures and stealing from your own father?" A long pause. "You don't understand the whole picture." "I understand enough." I started gathering the documents I'd photographed. "I understand that you and Carol are thieves." "We're survivors," he snapped. Dad's trust was always meant to support both families. He just couldn't see that Mom deserved an equal share. "So you decided to take it all? Including my house?" "The house was leverage. We needed you out of the way." His voice turned pleading. "Quinn, listen. There's still a place for you in this. Mom's willing to cut you in, a fair share, no questions asked. All you have to do is walk away from Dad." I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "You really don't know me at all, do you? I know you're smart enough to take a good deal when it's offered." A metallic sound, he was raising the unit's door. I stepped back into the shadows, clutching the most damning documents. "You're right about one thing. I am smart. Smart enough to make copies of everything I found tonight." He stepped into view, his face half lit by the security lights. "You're bluffing. Check your phone." He pulled it out. I just sent him the photos, documents, signatures, Carol's letter, everything. "That's just the start," I said. "I have more. Much more. You'll regret this." But I heard the fear beneath his anger. "No, Ryan. You and Carol are going to regret ever thinking you could get away with this." I walked past him, my heart pounding but my steps steady. He grabbed my arm. "We're not done," he hissed. "Actually, we are." I pulled free. "But hey, tell Carol something for me. Tell her I found the trust agreement. And tell her to check her own account balances. She might find some interesting transfers there too." His face went pale. I hadn't actually accessed Carol's accounts, but his reaction told me everything I needed to know. There was more to this scheme than even I had discovered. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Henry. "Be careful. More players involved." I smiled grimly. The game was getting bigger, but so were the stakes. And I was just getting started. Exhaustion hit me like a wave as I stared at my laptop screen, surrounded by takeout containers in Mia's spare bedroom. 3 days of digging through financial records had left me with bloodshot eyes and a growing sense of dread. "You need to sleep," Mia said from the doorway, holding out a cup of tea. "The documents will still be there in the morning." "I can't." I pointed at the screen. "Look at these transfers. They're not just stealing from Henry, they're moving money through dozens of accounts. Some of these names. I recognize them from the country club. Carol's friends. Mia sat beside me, squinting at the numbers. You think they're all involved? Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Just an address and 3 words, midnight. Come alone. Don't even think about it, Mia said, reading over my shoulder. It's from Henry's old business partner, I said, recognizing the area code. He might know something. Or it could be Ryan setting you up. She had a point, but I was already grabbing my keys. I'll be careful. The address led to an all-night diner on the edge of town. Through the window, I saw an elderly man in an expensive suit, sitting alone in a corner booth. James Warner, I remembered him from Henry's retirement party 2 years ago. You're braver than I expected, he said as I slid into the booth. Or maybe just more desperate. Why am I here, Mr. Warner? He pushed a manila envelope across the table. Because Carol Mitchell made a mistake. She got greedy. Inside the envelope were more financial documents, but these were different. They showed massive transfers between shell companies, all leading back to a single source, the country club's renovation fund. Carol's been embezzling from the club? I asked. Warner's laugh was bitter. The club was just the beginning. She's been running this scheme for years, using Henry's business connections to set up fake investment opportunities. Ryan helped her expand it after Henry's stroke. But now? Now what? Now they're getting sloppy. Making promises they can't keep. People are asking questions. He leaned forward. Important people. People who don't like losing money. A chill ran down my spine. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe Henry. And because Carol's about to throw Ryan under the bus to save herself. She's meeting with the club board tomorrow to pin everything on him. My hands clenched under the table. She'd do that to her own son. Carol Mitchell would sacrifice anyone to save herself. He stood up, dropping some cash for his untouched coffee. What you do with this information is up to you. But be careful, cornered rats bite hardest. I sat there long after he left, staring at the documents. My phone buzzed, a text from Ryan, we need to talk. Please. Then another from Carol, stay away from my son. And finally, one from Henry, don't trust anyone. Not even me. My head was spinning. Ryan was about to take the fall for years of fraud, orchestrated by his own mother. Part of me wanted to let it happen, he deserved it after what he'd done to me. But another part remembered the boy who'd once stayed up all night helping me edit my first video project. The man who'd held my hand through my father's funeral. My phone buzzed again. A video message from an unknown number. I pressed play. It showed Carol in what looked like a hotel room, arguing with someone off camera. Quinn knows too much, she was saying. We need to handle this now, before. The video cut off abruptly. My hands were shaking as I gathered the documents. Warner's warning echoed in my head, cornered rats bite hardest. Carol wasn't just trying to save herself anymore, she was actively threatening me. I walked out of the diner into the cold night air, my mind racing. I had evidence of their crimes, but using it meant putting Ryan in prison. Not using it meant letting Carol win. And somewhere in the middle was Henry, still vulnerable in that care facility. The game had changed. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about survival. And I had to decide, right now, how far I was willing to go to protect not just myself, but everyone caught in Carol's web of lies. The country club's annual charity gala was in full swing when I walked in wearing the black dress I'd bought for my anniversary, an anniversary that would never come. Ironic that my first public appearance since Ryan's betrayal would be here, surrounded by the very people who'd helped Carol steal millions. I spotted her holding court near the champagne fountain, Ryan hovering nervously at her side. They both froze when they saw me. Quinn, Carol's smile was razor-sharp. I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list. I held up my invitation. Courtesy of James Warner. He thought I should be here for the big announcement. Ryan's face went pale. Carol's grip tightened on her champagne flute. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, but her voice wavered slightly. Really? The board meeting didn't go as planned this morning? I moved closer, lowering my voice. Throwing your own son under the bus must have been difficult. You don't know what you're talking about, Ryan cut in, but his eyes darted to his mother. Show them, a quiet voice said behind me. Henry, wheeled in by his new private nurse, the one I'd hired after moving him to a better facility. Show them what we found. I pulled out my phone, pulling up the video Warner had sent me. Carol's face drained of color as her own voice filled the air between us. Ryan's signature is on everything. He'll take the fall, and we'll be free to. She snatched the phone from my hand. You're making a mistake. The mistake was thinking you could get away with this, I said, loud enough for nearby guests to turn. The club's money, Henry's trust, my house, did you really think no one would notice? Mother? Ryan's voice cracked. What is she talking about? Carol's composure cracked. I did it for you. Everything I've done has been to secure your future. The room had gone quiet. Club members were staring, whispering. I saw James Warner by the door, nodding slightly. My future? Ryan laughed bitterly. You mean the future where I go to prison while you run away with everything? No one is going to prison, Carol snapped, but her eyes were wild. Quinn, let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. Like the arrangement you made with the board? I asked. Blaming everything on Ryan while you walk away clean. You don't understand, she hissed. I had no choice. The investments went bad, people were asking questions. Someone had to take responsibility. And that someone had to be your son. Ryan stepped back from his mother like she'd struck him. The investments. They were never real, were they? It was all just a scheme. Carol reached for him, but he jerked away. Ryan, please. Everything I did was for yourself, Henry finished, his voice stronger than I'd heard in months. Always for yourself, Carol. She spun toward him, fury replacing fear. You don't get to judge me. You and your self-righteous morality, always making me feel small. Well, I took what I deserved. The confession hung in the air. Someone gasped. I saw phones recording, heard the murmurs growing louder. Mrs. Mitchell. A man in a dark suit approached. I'm Detective Roberts. We'd like to ask you some questions about the club's finances. Carol's face contorted. She looked at Ryan, then me, then back at her son. Ryan, tell them. Tell them you knew about the investments. Tell them you helped. But Ryan was already walking away, shoulders slumped, leaving his mother to face the consequences alone. As the detective led Carol away, I felt Henry's hand on mine. You did it, he said softly. We did it, I corrected, watching Ryan disappear through the club's doors. But it doesn't feel like winning. Justice rarely does, Henry replied. The question is, what happens next? I didn't have an answer. The storm had broken, but the aftermath was just beginning. And somewhere in the wreckage of this family, I had to find a way forward, not for revenge anymore, but for healing. The police station's fluorescent lights made everything look sickly and unreal. I sat across from Detective Roberts, watching him flip through the evidence I'd gathered, evidence that now seemed to be working against me. Mrs. Parker, he said, using my maiden name for the first time since the investigation began. Can you explain these transfers from Henry Mitchell's account to yours? My throat went dry. Those were for his care expenses. I've been managing. Without power of attorney. He slid another document across the table. And these withdrawals from the club's renovation fund? That was Carol, I started, but he cut me off. Carol Mitchell claims you orchestrated the whole scheme. She has documentation showing you accessed these accounts first, months before she did. The room started spinning. I'd been so focused on exposing Carol that I hadn't noticed her laying her trap. She'd somehow backdated transactions, making it look like I'd started everything. My phone buzzed, a text from Ryan, "Take the deal. Please." The deal had arrived through Carol's lawyer this morning. I could walk away with the house and a settlement if I took responsibility for the financial fraud. Carol would claim she'd been trying to stop me, and Ryan would back her story. "I need a moment," I told the detective, stepping out into the hallway where Mia waited. "They're trying to frame you," she said, hugging me. "We can fight this. Can we?" I showed her my phone, another text, this time from Carol, "Think about Henry. Prison would kill him at his age." She'd found a way to turn my protection of Henry against me. If I fought back, they'd implicate him too. The timestamps on the documents would support their story that he'd been aware of everything. "Quinn." Henry's voice made me turn. He'd wheeled himself down the hallway, looking friendlier than ever. "I heard what they're saying." "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I thought I was helping, but I just made everything worse." "No." His good hand gripped mine. "You woke me up. Made me see what Carol really was. But now." He glanced at the detective's door. "Maybe it's time to let go." "Let go?" I stared at him. "After everything they did?" "Sometimes winning means walking away," he said softly. "I've lost my wife to greed and my son to fear. I can't lose you too." Another text buzzed, "Final offer. Decision needed within the hour." I slid down the wall, sitting on the cold floor. Everything I'd fought for was unraveling. The evidence I'd gathered had been twisted against me. The justice I'd sought had become another weapon in Carol's arsenal. And now Henry, the person I'd most wanted to protect, was asking me to surrender. "There's something else," Mia said quietly, showing me her phone. A news article about the club's investigation included quotes from members defending Carol, claiming I'd manipulated her into covering for my schemes. My reputation was being destroyed in real time. The detective's door opened. "Mrs. Parker. We need your statement now." I looked at Henry, seeing the worry in his eyes. At Mia, whose face showed both support and fear. At my phone, where Ryan's latest message glowed, "Mom always wins. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'll be right there," I told the detective. As I stood up, Henry caught my hand again. "Whatever you decide," he said, "remember who you are. Not who they say you are." I walked back into the interrogation room, my mind racing. Carol had outmaneuvered me at every turn. She'd used my own evidence against me, turned my allies into liabilities, and forced me into an impossible choice. Take the fall or watch Henry suffer. The detective pushed a statement form across the table. "Ready to tell us what really happened?" I picked up the pen, feeling its weight like a sentence. Everything I'd done to expose the truth had only led me deeper into Carol's web. Now I had to decide, was justice worth the cost? Or was Henry right, was walking away the only way to truly win? The pen hovered over the paper as the clock ticked down on Carol's ultimatum. Whatever I wrote next would change everything, and there was no going back. I set my phone on the interrogation room table, pressed play, and watched Detective Roberts' expression change. "I know what you're planning." Henry's voice, stronger than I'd heard in months, filled the room. "You're going to frame Quinn for everything." "Of course we are." Carol's recorded voice was smug. "The timestamps are already altered. The paper trail leads to her. Ryan's on board." "And the real documents?" Henry asked. "Hidden where no one will find them. Once Quinn takes the fall, we'll..." I stopped the recording. "There's more. Hours more. Henry's been recording everything since his stroke. Turns out being the silent invalid in the corner has its advantages. The detective leaned back. Where did you get this? From me. Henry wheeled himself in, followed by 2 FBI agents. I've been working with them for months. Long before Quinn knew anything about Carol's schemes. Carol burst into the room, Ryan trailing behind her. You can't, she froze when she saw the agents. Actually, we can, one agent said. We've been investigating the club's finances for over a year. Henry's recordings just gave us the final piece. You're bluffing, Carol snarled, but her hands were shaking. Ryan, tell them. Tell them Quinn was behind everything. Ryan looked at me, then at his father. The facade cracked. I can't. Not anymore. You weak, pathetic, Carol lunged for my phone, but the detective caught her arm. Carol Mitchell, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. As they read her rights, she thrashed against the handcuffs. I did everything for this family. Everything. And you, she spat at Henry, you betrayed me. Your own wife. No, Carol. Henry's voice was sad but firm. You betrayed yourself. The money, the schemes, they became more important than family. Than love. Love? She laughed bitterly. Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't secure futures. I protected us. Protected us. Ryan's voice cracked. You were going to let Quinn go to prison. You were stealing from your own husband. From our friends. That's not protection, Mother. That's destruction. Carol's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw something real beneath the manipulation, fear, desperation, maybe even regret. Then it hardened again as the agents led her away. Ryan turned to me. Quinn, I don't. I held up my hand. Just don't. I should have stood up to her sooner. Should have told you everything. Yes, you should have. I looked at the man I'd once loved, seeing him clearly for the first time. But you didn't. And that's something you'll have to live with. The detective cleared his throat. Mr. Mitchell, we'll need your statement about your involvement. Ryan nodded, defeated. I'll tell you everything. As they led him away, Henry touched my hand. You could have taken the deal. Walked away with the house, with security. The house wasn't worth my integrity. I squeezed his hand. And neither was revenge. It wasn't revenge, he said quietly. It was justice. For both of us. Mia appeared in the doorway, grinning. The FBI agent said they found Carol's hidden documents. Everything's there, the real timestamps, the transfer records, all of it. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. What happens now? Now, Henry said, we rebuild. Not what was, but what could be. I looked at the empty doorway where Carol and Ryan had disappeared. The path of destruction they'd carved through our lives was still there, but it no longer defined us. They'd tried to bury me, not realizing I was a seed. Quinn. Mia held up her car keys. Ready to go home. Home. Not the house Ryan had sold out from under me. Not the life Carol had tried to steal. But something new, something honest. Yeah, I said, helping Henry maneuver his wheelchair toward the door. Let's go home. Behind us, I could still hear Carol's voice echoing down the hallway, demanding her lawyer. But for the first time since this all began, I didn't need to look back. The future, uncertain as it was, lay ahead. 6 months later, I stood in front of my old house, watching the new owners plant spring bulbs in what used to be my garden. Their little girl chased a butterfly across the lawn, her laughter carrying on the breeze. It didn't hurt anymore, seeing someone else living my old life. Ready? Henry asked from the passenger seat of my car. His speech had improved dramatically since starting the new therapy program. Almost. I pulled an envelope from my purse, Carol's letter, discovered among the documents the FBI had recovered. I hadn't opened it yet, wasn't sure I wanted to. You don't have to read it, Henry said quietly. I know. But I did. Not for closure, I'd found that already, but for understanding. The letter was dated the day before everything fell apart. Ryan, I'm scared. Everything's spinning out of control. Quinn's getting too close, and I can't see a way out that doesn't destroy us all. Maybe that's what I deserve. I spent so long trying to protect us from ending up like my parents, broke, desperate, ashamed, that I became something worse. You deserved better than a mother who taught you to fear poverty more than dishonesty. Henry deserved better than a wife who saw him as a bank account instead of a partner. And Quinn. She saw through me from the beginning. That's why I had to destroy her. Because she reminded me of who I used to be, before fear ate away at everything good inside me. The letter ended there, unfinished, unsent. I folded it carefully and let the wind take it from my fingers. The sentencing is tomorrow, Henry reminded me gently. Carol was facing 15 years. Ryan had made a deal for 5, with restitution. The club members who'd lost money were being repaid, and Henry's assets had been restored. Justice, by any legal definition. Mia's waiting at the new place, I said, starting the car. She's convinced the feng shui needs adjusting before we move in. Henry chuckled. That woman would rearrange the stars if she could. The new place was actually an old craftsman house we'd bought together, Henry with his restored savings, me with my share of the recovered funds. 2 separate apartments under one roof, a fresh start for both of us. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Mia sage smudging the front porch. But it was the figure beside her that made me pause, Ryan, holding a box. He asked to help with the move, Henry said. I told him it was your decision. Ryan looked thinner, older. Prison hadn't started yet, but the weight of consequences had already changed him. He set the box down when he saw us. I can go, he said. I should have felt anger, seeing him here. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. The boxes in the truck need unloading, I said. Just don't break anything else. He nodded, understanding all the layers in that statement. Inside, Mia had arranged crystals in every window. For protection, she explained. And new beginnings. Speaking of new beginnings, Henry pulled out a small wrapped package. For your office. Inside was a framed photo, not of family or friends, but of a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. Below it, a simple inscription, growth requires destruction. Carol sent it, Henry said quietly. From prison. I traced the butterfly's fragile wings through the glass. She finally understood, didn't she? Too late, but she understood. It's never too late to understand, Henry said. Only to change the past. Outside, Ryan was carefully carrying boxes up the porch steps. Mia was singing something about cleansing energies. And through the window, I could see the mountains where I'd build my new editing studio. Where I'd tell other people's stories until I was ready to tell my own. You know what the funny thing is? I said to Henry. I thought this whole journey was about revenge. About justice. But it was really about transformation. He smiled, squeezing my hand. The best revenge is becoming exactly who you were meant to be. I hung the butterfly photo in my new office, where the morning light would catch its wings. Some things had to break before they could become beautiful. Some people had to lose everything to find themselves. And sometimes, the greatest act of revenge was simply learning how to fly.